My ex-husband invited me to his wedding but arranged for me to enter through the servants' entrance and sit in the worst seat. "Make sure she knows her place," he told security. When my black Bentley pulled up to the main entrance, I stepped out in a golden dress. 500 guests froze in silence. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. After the divorce, I'd moved from Atlanta to Boston, a city where no one knew my name or the story my ex-husband, Preston, had so carefully crafted about me. I poured myself into my work as a pediatric doctor at Boston Children's Hospital. The long hours were a blessing, they filled the spaces that loneliness might have otherwise occupied. My life revolved around healing sick children, the sterile scent of the hospital, and the quiet satisfaction of making a difference. Then I'd come home. And my home wasn't quiet at all. It was loud and chaotic and filled with more love than I had ever known. It was filled with Caleb, Cole, and Cameron. My boys. My beautiful, identical triplet sons. They were 5 years old, a whirlwind of curly black hair, scraped knees, and questions about everything from why the sky was blue to why broccoli looked like little trees. They were my secret, my joy, the family I'd been told I could never have. A family I had created on my own terms after Preston was out of the picture. One Tuesday, after a particularly draining 12-hour shift, I pulled into my driveway, my shoulders aching with fatigue. All I wanted was to hug my boys and smell the warm spices of whatever magic Mrs. Patel, our wonderful nanny, was cooking. As I gathered the mail from the box, my fingers brushed against it. A heavy, expensive envelope. The kind of stationery you don't see every day. My name, Dr. Audra Harrison, was written in elegant, looping calligraphy. The return address was Atlanta. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. I knew that handwriting. It was his. "I'm home," I called out, my voice a little shaky as I dropped my keys and the mail on the hall table. Instantly, the thunder of small feet echoed down the hallway. "Mommy," they shouted in a glorious, chaotic unison, crashing into my legs. I knelt down, my exhaustion melting away as I wrapped my arms around their small, warm bodies. Caleb, always the leader, was already telling me about the magnificent block tower he'd built. Cole, the quieter one, just hugged me tight, while Cameron, my little artist, proudly held up a drawing of our family, for stick figures under a smiling sun. "They were perfect angels," Mrs. Patel said, emerging from the kitchen with a kind smile. "Dinner is almost ready." "Thank you, Mrs. Patel." "I don't know what I'd do without you," I said, my gratitude genuine. After the boys ran off to wash their hands, I picked up the mail again. My hand hesitated over the cream envelope. For a moment, I considered just throwing it in the recycling bin. Tossing it away, unopened. Why let him back into my life, even for a second? But curiosity, or maybe some deeper need to know what he was up to, won out. Upstairs, in the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom, I changed out of my scrubs and into a soft sweater. I sat on the edge of my bed, the envelope feeling cold in my hands. With a deep breath, I slid it open. Inside was a ridiculously ornate wedding invitation. "Preston Wallace and Brielle Sanders request the honor of your presence at their marriage. Chateau Elon Winery and Resort." So, he was getting married again. To a social media influencer half my age, a girl whose entire life was a curated collection of perfect pictures. A part of me, a small, petty part one wasn't proud of, felt a sting. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of his endless need for validation. Then I saw the RSVP card. Tucked inside, separate from the invitation. And on the back, in that same familiar handwriting, was a short, cruel note written just for me. "Last seat, last row. Where you belong." The air left my lungs. The words were a physical blow, designed to wound, to remind me of the narrative he had sold to everyone in Atlanta. The narrative that I was the problem. The 42-year-old career woman who was too old, too focused on her work, too barren, to give him the family he so desperately wanted. The lie he had built to hide his own devastating secret. I remembered the day our marriage truly died. We were in a cold, sterile fertility specialist's office. I remember the hum of the fluorescent lights, the bland art on the walls. The doctor, a kind man with sad eyes, had looked at Preston, not me, and delivered the news. Low sperm count. Poor motility. It was him. It had always been him. I had reached for his hand, ready to face it together. We have options, Preston, I'd whispered. We can look into a donor, adoption. But he had recoiled as if I'd burned him. His pride, his fragile, masculine ego, couldn't handle it. The star athlete, the self-made millionaire, couldn't be flawed. It was an impossibility in his mind. From that day on, he became a different person. Distant, cruel. He started staying out late, the smell of cheap perfume clinging to his expensive suits. He was pushing me away, trying to force me to be the one to leave, so he could control the story of our divorce. And when I finally gave in, broken and exhausted, he did just that. He told everyone the lie. And because he was Preston Wallace, charming and powerful, everyone believed him. Now, holding this invitation, I realized he wasn't done. He needed one last performance. He needed me there, in the back row, as a prop in his grand spectacle of success, so everyone could see the old, bitter ex-wife watching him marry his young, fertile bride. He wanted to shame me into oblivion. I sank back onto my bed, the cruel words on the card blurring through my tears. For a moment, I felt that old, familiar despair creep in. The feeling of being powerless against his wealth and his lies. But then, I heard it. A burst of laughter from downstairs. The sound of my boys. Caleb, Cole, and Cameron. My sons. The living, breathing, beautiful proof that he was a liar. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The tears stopped. The despair receded, replaced by a cold, clear calm. He wanted me to be ashamed. He expected me to hide, or to show up broken. He had no idea. He had no idea who I was anymore. He had no idea what my life was like. He had sent me an invitation to my own humiliation. But I decided, right then and there, that I was going to treat it as an invitation to my own liberation. The next few days were a quiet storm of planning. The initial shock of Preston's cruelty had hardened into a steely resolve. I wasn't going to his wedding for revenge. Revenge felt hot and messy, and honestly, I was past that. What I wanted was something cleaner, something more powerful. I wanted closure. I wanted to walk into that place, the heart of his kingdom of lies, and stand in my own truth, with my head held high. My Thursday night dinner with my best friend, Tanya, couldn't come soon enough. It was a ritual we'd started right after my move to Boston, a constant in the chaos of rebuilding my life. As soon as my boys were settled in the living room with Mrs. Patel, building a new, even more ambitious block tower, I pulled the invitation from my purse and slid it across the kitchen table. Tanya, a sharp-witted ER nurse who had seen it all, picked it up. Her eyes scanned the elegant script, and then she flipped over the RSVP card. Her face, usually so full of humor, darkened. "That absolute jerk," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "After everything? After the lies he spread that practically ran you out of Atlanta, he has the nerve to do this? He wants an audience for his final act of cruelty." "Some wounds to the ego never heal, I guess," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you, Audra?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't. It's a trap." I looked through the doorway to where my boys were playing. The sound of their laughter was the anchor that kept me from drifting back into old feelings of hurt. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding my life, Tanya. 3 years letting his version of our story be the only one people in Atlanta ever heard. The story that I was too old, that it was my fault we couldn't have a family. While hiding the fact that his swimmers couldn't find their way out of a paper bag, Tanya finished grimly. And now you have 3 incredible boys who prove he was a liar all along. Exactly, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. He expects me to either not show up at all, or to crawl in, alone and embarrassed. He wants me to be a ghost from his past that he can publicly vanquish. I took a sip of my wine. He doesn't know about the boys. He has no idea what my life is really like now. Tanya's eyes lit up with understanding. Oh, I see where this is going. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. You're going to walk in there and drop a truth bomb that will level that entire $500,000 party. I'm just going to show up, I corrected her gently. As an invited guest. With my family. Later that night, long after I'd tucked my sons into their beds with stories and goodnight kisses, I sat in my home office, the invitation lying on my desk under the lamplight. It looked like a weapon. My first call was to a number I hadn't dialed in years, but one I knew by heart. Dr. Jordan's office. Sam, it's Audra Harrison. Dr. Samuel Jordan had been my fertility specialist, but he'd also become a friend, a steady, compassionate guide through the darkest days of my divorce and my journey to motherhood. Audra! How are my favorite little men? Ready to take kindergarten by storm? He asked warmly. They're amazing, thanks to you, I said, smiling. Sam, I'm calling because I received something today. Preston is getting married again. There was a pause on the line. And how do you feel about that? He sent a nasty little note with the invitation. He wants me there so he can humiliate me, I explained. He still doesn't know about the boys. I never told him I used a donor. You had every right to your privacy after the way he treated you, Dr. Jordan said firmly. What are you thinking of doing? I took a deep breath. I think I need to go. For 3 years, I've let him control the narrative about our marriage. I left my practice, my friends, my entire life there because I couldn't stand the whispers. Maybe it's time people saw the truth, instead of just hearing his lies. That's a big step. Are you sure you're ready for that? I glanced at the framed photo of my sons on my desk, all 3 of them grinning gap-toothed smiles. I think I am, I said. My next call was more of a long shot. I opened my laptop and looked up the management of the Chateau Elon. A name jumped out at me. Leland Davis. I remembered him from high school back in Philadelphia. A kind, quiet guy from the AV Club. It was worth a try. Chateau Elon, how may I help you? A polite voice answered. Leland? Leland Davis? I asked, crossing my fingers. There was a surprised pause. Yes, this is Leland. Who's calling? It's Audra Harrison. We went to North Penn High together. Recognition dawned in his voice. Audra. Of course. Wow, it's been years. I heard you became a doctor. I'm a manager here now. I know, that's why I'm calling. Leland, I need a favor. A big one. My ex-husband, Preston Wallace, is having his wedding there in 3 weeks. Leland's voice dropped. I know. I saw your name on the guest list and was surprised. Considering he spread lies about me all over Atlanta? I finished for him. Yes. Well, he sent the invitation with a note. I believe he's planning some kind of public humiliation. That sounds like the Preston I remember, Leland said with a sigh of disapproval. What can I do to help? I'm going to attend, I explained, but not the way he expects. I have 5-year-old triplet sons now, Leland. Sons Preston knows nothing about. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then, triplets? Audra, that's wonderful. He paused again. Wait. Are they? I used a donor after the divorce, I clarified. Preston was the one with fertility issues. That was just another one of his lies. I always suspected as much, Leland said, his voice hard. What do you need from me? I need to avoid whatever trap he has set. Security is probably instructed to send me to the back entrance, to a table in the kitchen. Can you help me arrive on my own terms? Consider it done, Leland promised, a new energy in his voice. I will personally make sure you and your boys are treated like royalty. This is going to be very, very interesting. After I hung up, a sense of power, something I hadn't felt in years, washed over me. I walked to my closet and pulled out a garment bag that had been tucked away in the back. Inside was a stunning, golden Kent cloth dress I'd bought on a trip years ago but never had the occasion to wear. It was a connection to my heritage, a symbol of royalty and strength. I held it up against myself, picturing it. Picturing myself walking into his perfectly curated white wedding, a splash of vibrant, unapologetic gold. And I pictured my 3 little princes, in matching outfits, holding my hands. I looked at the invitation one last time before setting it on my desk. Tomorrow, I would book the flights. I would call my parents in Philadelphia and ask them to meet us in Atlanta, for support. And I would call a tailor. It was time to show Preston Wallace that his lies hadn't destroyed me. They had set me free. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Preston's world, from what I later gathered, began to revolve around a single, maddening question: why hadn't I RSVP'd yet? He paced the marble floors of his Atlanta penthouse, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to his growing obsession, constantly refreshing the online guest list on his tablet. She's playing games, he'd mutter to himself. Meanwhile, his fiancée, Brielle, was busy performing for her own audience. She was a master of the curated life, her 5 million social media followers treated to a daily stream of wedding-related content. One morning, she was filming an unboxing video, surrounded by a mountain of expensive gifts from their registry. Good morning to all my besties, she chirped to her phone's camera. Today, we're unboxing these incredible crystal champagne flutes from Tiffany's. Don't forget to swipe up for the link. Preston watched her from the doorway, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before he replaced it with his usual charming smile. She was the perfect accessory, young, beautiful, famous, and completely oblivious to the rot beneath the surface of his perfect life. How's the video going, sweetheart? He asked, his voice smooth as silk. Great. This post is already getting thousands of likes, she said, her attention still glued to her screen. Their meeting with the wedding planner, Vanessa, at the Chateau Elon only fueled Preston's fixation. As Vanessa went over the final details, ice sculptures, rare flowers flown in from South America, custom lighting, Preston's mind was elsewhere. We've confirmed 298 guests so far, Vanessa said, consulting her clipboard. Just waiting on a few more responses. Including Audra Harrison, Preston said immediately, his tone sharp. Brielle glanced at him. It was the 3rd time he'd brought up my name that morning. Yes, Dr. Harrison hasn't responded yet, Vanessa confirmed. I can follow up with a courtesy call if you'd like. No! Preston snapped, a little too quickly. She'll respond. Just make sure her seating assignment remains exactly as I requested. While Brielle was distracted tasting cake samples, Preston pulled aside the event manager, a man named Tom, for a private word. My ex-wife will be attending, Preston said in a low, conspiratorial voice. I want to make sure her experience is memorable. He then proceeded to give a series of cruel instructions. He wanted the chair at my assigned table to have one leg slightly shorter than the others, just enough to be a constant, wobbly annoyance. He wanted my meal to be served last, and he hinted that perhaps the kitchen could find a portion that was, as he put it, not quite as fresh as the others. The manager looked deeply uncomfortable. Sir, I'm not sure we can. I'm spending $500,000 on this event, Preston cut him off, his voice like ice. This is a personal matter. I'm simply asking for your discretion. Unbeknownst to him, Brielle had finished her task and had wandered over, just in time to hear the end of his request. Preston, she called out, her brow furrowed. What was that about? Whose meal shouldn't be fresh? Preston spun around, his charming mask slipping back into place instantly. Nothing, sweetheart. Just dealing with a difficult business rival who RSVP'd. Don't you worry about it. He took her hand, leading her away to look at flower arrangements, but the seed of doubt had been planted in Brielle's mind. It was the second time that week she'd caught him in what felt like a lie. The first had been a few nights earlier. She'd overheard him on the phone in his office, his voice tense. Listen, Mark, the investors don't need to see those particular numbers, he was saying. Just show them the projected returns. No, the funds were temporarily reallocated. It's a common practice, no one will find out if you just follow the plan. When he'd realized she was there, he'd brushed it off as business stress, but the words misrepresented funds and legal implications had stuck with her. Her father, James Rivera, a shrewd businessman from Miami, did little to soothe her worries when he arrived a week before the wedding. Over dinner at an exclusive Atlanta restaurant, James watched Preston with calculating eyes. So, Preston, James said, swirling the bourbon in his glass. Ashley tells me your first wedding was a much smaller affair. Preston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Different circumstances, he said curtly. Later, when Preston stepped away to take a call, James leaned in towards his daughter. Ashley, what do you really know about this man's first marriage? Why did it really end? Dad, I told you, she sighed, exasperated. His wife was older. They wanted different things. She couldn't have children. And you believe that's the whole story? James pressed. Honey, I just want to make sure you're marrying the man, not the image he projects. Something feels off. Back in Boston, my own plans were solidifying. I met with my lawyer, Sarah Bennett, not to plan a lawsuit, but to be prepared. I wanted to have all my ducks in a row. I don't plan to make any public accusations, I explained, laying out the fertility test results from 3 years ago. But if he tries to humiliate me, I need to know my legal standing. These medical records, combined with documented evidence of his false statements about you, would make for a very compelling defamation case, should you ever choose to pursue it, Sarah advised. Having that knowledge felt like putting on a suit of armor. Then came the more enjoyable part of the preparations. I found a wonderful tailor who specialized in traditional African clothing. I showed her a picture of my golden Kent dress and photos of my boys. I need 3 matching outfits for my sons, I explained. They need to be perfect. They're beautiful children, the tailor said, her eyes twinkling. They will look like little kings. That evening, I finally sat down and logged into the wedding website. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed my name, and then I paused. A +1 was standard. But the invitation hadn't specified. The system allowed for more. A slow smile spread across my face. Guests attending, 4. Audra Harrison +3. I clicked submit. In Atlanta, an email notification pinged on Preston's computer. He clicked it open, his heart racing. Audra Harrison has responded. His eyes widened as he read the details. +3, he whispered, his face going pale. Who the hell is she bringing? He immediately called Vanessa, the wedding planner, his voice tight with fury. Vanessa, fix this. The invitation was only for her. I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace, Vanessa replied calmly. The system allows for multiple guests unless a limitation is set. Your ex-wife's invitation didn't specify. A +1 is standard, not a +3, he seethed. I can call her if you'd like to clarify. No, he barked. Don't contact her. He hung up, his mind racing. Who could it be? A new boyfriend and his friends? A lawyer? He immediately dialed the security company and updated his instructions. Monica Harrison is now bringing 3 unknown guests, he said, his voice cold. I want them all photographed upon arrival. Monitor them constantly. If they cause any disruption whatsoever, remove them. All of them. His perfect plan for revenge was becoming messy, unpredictable. And Preston Wallace did not like unpredictable. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room at the resort, a space dripping with crystals and smelling of expensive lilies. The air was thick with forced cheerfulness. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard all about it later, from multiple sources. It was the moment the first real cracks began to show in Preston's carefully constructed facade. He was on edge the entire evening, his eyes constantly darting towards the door as if he expected me to burst in at any moment. He barely spoke to Brielle, his attention consumed by his phone, where he was no doubt reviewing the updated security plans for the 10th time. The tension became unbearable when Preston's father, Harold Wallace, stood up to give a toast. Harold was a man cut from the same cloth as his son, arrogant, obsessed with appearances, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. He raised his champagne flute, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. To Preston and Brielle, he began, his booming voice filling the room. Son, after your first marriage, your mother and I worried you might never find the happiness you deserve. But you've done well for yourself. He beamed at Brielle. A beautiful, young wife who can finally give you the family you've always wanted. To new beginnings, and to future grandchildren. A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over the table. Brielle's smile became a frozen, painful mask. The implication was clear, a deliberate dig at the older, barren ex-wife. Next to Preston, Garrett Cooper, his best man and oldest friend, muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, real classy, Harold. Bringing up children, considering the truth. Preston shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass and jabbed an elbow into his ribs. Shut up, he hissed. Garrett had been quiet all evening. He was the only one in Preston's inner circle who knew the whole, ugly truth. He'd been with Preston at the fertility clinic. He'd watched Preston build the lie, and for 3 years, his silence had made him complicit. But something about Harold's smug toast seemed to be the last straw. Later, Garrett excused himself to go to the restroom. Brielle, sensing an opportunity, followed him. She caught up to him in the plush, carpeted hallway. Garrett, can I ask you something? She said, her voice low. He stopped, looking deeply uncomfortable. Of course, Brielle. Preston, he seems obsessed with his ex-wife being here tomorrow. It feels like more than just wanting to show off. What really happened between them? Why did they really get a divorce? Garrett hesitated, avoiding her eyes. Brielle, I think you should ask Preston about this. I have, she insisted, her voice gaining an edge of desperation. He just repeats the same story. That she was too old, that she couldn't have children. But something feels wrong. The way he talks about her, it's filled with so much venom. Please, Garrett. I'm marrying him tomorrow. I deserve to know the truth. Garrett took a deep breath, looking as if a great weight was pressing down on him. Look, he began, his voice barely a whisper. The divorce, it wasn't about children. Not really. It was about Preston's inability to accept. There you are. Preston's voice cut through the air like a whip. He was standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. Dessert is being served. What are you two discussing so seriously out here? Nothing important, Garrett said quickly, giving Brielle an apologetic look before retreating back to the dining room. Preston took Brielle's arm, his grip a little too tight. What did he tell you? He demanded. Nothing, she said, pulling her arm away. But I wish someone would. The rest of the dinner was a blur of tension. Brielle felt a growing sense of dread. The man she was supposed to marry felt like a stranger. Later that night, back in their luxurious suite, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of a precipice. While Preston was in the shower, she saw his tuxedo jacket for the next day draped over a chair. A piece of paper was sticking out of the breast pocket. Her hands trembling, she pulled it out. It was a printed memo from the security company. The title read, Monica Harrison, Monitoring Plan. Her blood ran cold as she read the detailed, cruel instructions. Subject arrival, direct to service entrance only. No exceptions. Seating, table 42, rear corner. Chair to be prepped as per Mr. Wallace's instructions. Surveillance, assign one plainclothes operative to monitor subject's table. Position hidden camera in floral arrangement to capture expressions during ceremony vows. Protocol, report all movements. If subject causes any disturbance or attempts to approach the bridal party, remove immediately and discreetly. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in Preston's familiar script, make sure she knows her place. This wasn't precaution. This was a calculated, sadistic plot. This was the act of a bully, a man consumed by a need to inflict pain. What are you doing with my jacket? Preston's voice made her jump. He stood in the bathroom doorway, a towel around his waist, his expression darkening as he saw the memo in her hands. What is this, Preston? She asked, her voice shaking as she held up the paper. Is this really who you are? A man who schemes to humiliate his ex-wife at his own wedding? You don't understand, he said, snatching the paper from her. She deserves this after what she did to me. What did she do? Brielle cried, her frustration finally boiling over. Because every time I ask, you give me these vague, rehearsed answers. What are you hiding from me? This is not the time, Brielle, he snarled. We have a wedding in less than 12 hours. 300 guests are arriving. Your social media team is already setting up for the live updates. I don't care about the live updates, she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. I care about the truth. I need the truth, Preston. Right now. Before he could answer, his phone, sitting on the nightstand, buzzed urgently. He glanced at the screen. It was the head of security. He picked it up, his face a mask of irritation. What is it? He listened for a moment, and all the color drained from his face. What do you mean, a black Bentley? Who's in it? Stall them. Just stall them. I'll be right there. He slammed the phone down and rushed to get dressed, not even glancing at Brielle. As he ran out of the room, she was left standing alone, holding the crumpled security memo in her hand. Her beautiful, custom-made wedding gown was hanging on the door, looking like a costume for a play she no longer wanted to be in. The clock was ticking, getting closer and closer to the ceremony, and all she could think was, who is the man I'm about to marry? The morning of the wedding dawned bright and painfully clear. The Georgia sun streamed through the windows of the Chateau Elan, glinting off the thousands of white roses and crystal decorations. It was supposed to be a fairy tale. From what I heard, it felt more like the countdown to a detonation. In the bridal suite, Brielle sat numbly in a silk robe while a makeup artist tried to paint a happy face onto her troubled one. Her bridesmaids chattered excitedly around her, oblivious, sipping mimosas and taking selfies. Her father came in, his expression grave. It's not too late to postpone, he said gently, pulling her aside. Postpone a $500,000 wedding on the day of? Brielle whispered, the absurdity of it all hitting her. The internet would explode. My followers. She stopped herself, a look of sudden clarity on her face. Is that what I'm really worried about? My social media reputation? Meanwhile, in the groom's quarters, Preston wasn't looking at his bride. He was staring at his phone, frantically refreshing the security camera feeds from around the property. Any sign of her? Garrett asked from the doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo. Nothing yet, Preston muttered, not looking up. Security says she hasn't even checked out of her hotel. Garrett sighed, a deep, weary sound. Preston, it's your wedding day. Can you please, for 1 second, focus on Brielle instead of Audra? I am focused. Preston snapped. I'm focused on making sure everything goes according to my plan. You mean your revenge plan? Garrett retorted, his patience finally gone. This is insane. You're about to marry a woman who, for some reason, loves you, and you're obsessed with humiliating your ex-wife. Why? Preston finally looked up, his face tight with a rage that had been simmering for 3 years. You don't understand what it was like after the divorce. The whispers. People looking at me differently, thinking I left my wife because she was too old to have children. My reputation. A reputation you created. Garrett interrupted, his voice rising. You're the one who spread those rumors, Preston. You're the one who couldn't handle the truth about your own body, so you destroyed her name to protect your fragile ego. I'm warning you for the last time, Garrett. Drop it, Preston said, his voice dangerously low. Or what? Garrett said, straightening his tie. I've been your friend for 15 years. I'm the only one who knows the whole truth, and it is eating you alive. I'll stand up there with you today because I promised I would. But after this, I'm done. I'm done watching you hurt people. Across town, at our hotel, the atmosphere was completely different. It was calm, it was joyful. I helped my boys into their matching golden outfits. The rich Kent cloth shimmered as I adjusted Caleb's little bow tie. You look so handsome, I said, my heart swelling as I looked at my 3 little men, standing in a perfect row. Like little princes, my mother, Evelyn, said. She was wearing a beautiful dress of deep purple, a nod to our Jamaican heritage. My father, George, looked distinguished and strong in his dark suit. Are you sure about this, Audra? He asked one last time. It's not too late to just go get brunch. I smiled, stepping into my own golden dress. The fabric felt like armor. I'm sure, Dad. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about finally standing in my truth. My phone rang. It was Leland from the chateau. The Bentley will be there in 1 hour, he said, his voice crisp and professional. Preston has security watching all the entrances, but they're expecting a single woman in a sad little taxi to be directed to the service lane. They have no idea about the boys. Is everything else set? Yes, I said, taking a deep breath. Thank you, Leland. I'll never forget this. As the clock ticked closer to 2, the guests began to take their seats in the sun-drenched garden. A string quartet played softly. It was all picture perfect. And then, at the main entrance, a sleek, black Bentley, polished to a mirror shine, rolled to a stop. It wasn't on the approved vehicle list. 2 security guards immediately approached, speaking into their radios. We have an unauthorized vehicle at the main gate. Preston, hearing the call on his own earpiece, rushed out of the main building, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and anxiety. Who authorized this? He demanded, glaring at the car's tinted windows. Just then, Leland Davis stepped forward from the entrance, calm and composed. I did, Mr. Wallace, he said clearly. As the manager on duty, I made executive arrangements for Dr. Harrison's arrival. You had no right, Preston began, but his words died in his throat. The driver opened the Bentley's rear door. And I stepped out. The sunlight hit the golden fabric of my dress, and for a moment, I seemed to glow. I stood tall, my expression calm, my head held high. A ripple of whispers went through the guests who were still arriving. They recognized me. This was not the broken, pathetic woman from Preston's stories. Preston's shock quickly turned to something else, something closer to horror, as Caleb stepped out of the car behind me. Then Cole. Then Cameron. 3 small boys, identical down to their bright, curious eyes, all dressed in matching golden outfits. They stood in a neat row beside me, each one taking one of my hands. "That's impossible," Preston whispered, all the color draining from his face. I nodded politely in his direction, but I didn't speak to him. I turned to Leland. "Thank you for arranging our transportation," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My pleasure, Dr. Harrison," Leland replied, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your seats are ready. In the front row, as you requested." "The front row?" Preston sputtered, finding his voice. "No. Absolutely not. Her seat is in the back." It was then that Caleb, my brave, outspoken boy, tugged on my dress. He looked up at Preston, his head tilted. In a clear, innocent voice that carried across the stunned silence, he asked, "Mommy, is this the man who told lies about you?" A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Phones, which had been discreetly tucked away, suddenly appeared, their cameras aimed directly at us. The fairy tale had just become a reality show. My son's question hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The carefully orchestrated symphony of Preston's perfect day screeched to a halt. The string quartet may as well have been playing a funeral dirge. "Caleb, remember what we talked about?" "Indoor voices," I said gently, squeezing his hand, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at Preston, my expression unreadable. "We're here as invited guests, Preston. Nothing more." Just then, my parents emerged from the Bentley. My father placed a protective hand on my shoulder, a silent, powerful statement, while my mother took the hands of my other two boys. The wedding planner, Vanessa, rushed over, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her face a mask of panicked confusion. "There seems to be some confusion," she stammered. "Dr. Harrison, your seating assignment is..." "Dr. Harrison and her family will be seated in the front row," Leland interrupted firmly, stepping between us. "As my personal guests." Preston's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward and grabbed Leland's arm. "You work for me today. I paid for this entire event." "I work for Chateau Elon," Leland corrected, calmly removing Preston's hand from his arm. "And we don't discriminate against guests or force them to use service entrances." More people were gathering now, their polite wedding chatter replaced by urgent, excited whispers. Preston's parents, Harold and Patricia, pushed through the crowd. "Preston, what is happening?" Patricia demanded, her perfectly coiffed hair not moving an inch. Then her eyes fell on my son's, and she froze. Her perfectly painted smile vanished. Who are these children?" "Ask your son," I replied, my voice even. "He's known about my fertility for years." Preston stepped between me and his mother, trying to regain control. "She used a donor," he spat out, the lie coming easily to him. "This is just a stunt. She's trying to ruin my wedding." "Is that true?" Patricia asked, turning to me, her eyes filled with confusion. "I did use a donor," I confirmed, looking directly at her. "After my divorce. After I learned that despite Preston's claims, I was not the one with fertility issues." The whispers in the crowd grew louder, more frantic. Harold, his face turning a blotchy red, stepped forward. "How dare you bring this drama to my son's wedding day," he shouted at me. I held up the invitation, the one I had brought with me for this very moment. "I was invited," I said calmly. "Complete with this special note." I turned over the RSVP card, displaying Preston's elegant, cruel handwriting for all to see. "Last seat, last row, where you belong." A new wave of gasps rippled through the guests. Someone near the front audibly murmured, "Oh, that's just awful." Preston lunged for the invitation, but Garrett, his own best man, stepped between us. "That's enough, Preston," Garrett said, his voice firm and final. "Stay out of this." Preston growled. "No," Garrett replied, his voice ringing with the conviction of a man who had been silent for too long. "This has gone far enough. I have watched you lie about Audra for 3 years. He turned, not to Preston, but to the crowd, to Preston's parents. I was there. I was with him at the doctor's office when he was told about his low sperm count. I watched him blame her age instead of accepting his own truth. A dead silence fell over the crowd. Every phone was now recording. Patricia Wallace covered her mouth with a trembling hand, her eyes wide with horror. You told us she couldn't have children, she whispered to her son. You said that's why you had to get the divorce. He lied, Garrett confirmed, his voice heavy with regret. And he's been living with that lie ever since. At that exact moment, a figure appeared at the main entrance of the chateau. It was Brielle. She wasn't in her wedding dress. She was in her silk robe, her elaborate makeup stained with tears. She had heard everything. She walked slowly, deliberately, down the steps, her eyes fixed not on Preston, but on me and my sons. She stopped in front of us, her gaze soft and searching. These are your sons? She asked me quietly. I nodded. Yes. They're 5 years old. Brielle did the math in her head. I could see the final, painful piece of the puzzle click into place. 5 years old. Conceived shortly after our divorce. After he had left me because I supposedly couldn't have children. 5 years, she repeated, her voice a broken whisper. She turned to face Preston, tears now streaming freely down her face. You lied. You lied about her. You lied about everything. Brielle, please, he begged, reaching for her arm. Let me explain. Explain what? She cried, pulling away from him. That our entire relationship has been about your obsession with hurting your ex-wife? That this whole wedding was just another performance for your ego? I found your security plans, Preston. I found the memo about the wobbly chair and the hidden cameras. It was never about her age, was it? His business partner, Michael, suddenly pushed through the crowd, his face pale, his phone clutched in his hand. Preston, my phone is blowing up. Our investors, they're seeing this. It's being live-streamed everywhere. I don't care. Preston shouted, finally losing the last shred of his composure. This was supposed to be my day. My perfect day to show everyone. To show everyone what? Brielle interrupted, her voice clear and strong. That you could fool another woman into marrying you? That you could publicly humiliate a good person just to protect your fragile ego? I felt a gentle touch on my arm. It was Brielle. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a surprising compassion. I never meant for this to happen, I said softly. I came for closure, not to ruin your day. You didn't ruin anything, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. He did that all by himself. She turned back to the gathered crowd, her voice ringing out. I'm sorry, everyone. There will be no wedding today. And with that, she pulled the massive diamond ring from her finger. She walked right up to Preston, who stood frozen in the center of his ruined fantasy, and placed it firmly in his palm. Your performance is over, Preston. If you're still listening, would you do me a small favor and like this video, and maybe comment the number 1 down below? It lets me know you're still with me on this journey, and your support truly means the world to me. It gives me the encouragement to keep going. Just type the number 1, and then I'll tell you what happened next. Brielle turned and walked away without a backward glance. Her bridesmaids, who had been hovering in shocked silence, scurried after her. The fairy tale was officially over. Preston stood alone, the diamond ring heavy in his hand, the symbol of a future that had just vanished. Brielle, wait, he called out, his voice hoarse. You can't do this. Everything is paid for. The photographers, the media coverage. Let her go, man, Garrett said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's over. The guests began to stir, a murmuring tide of confusion and gossip. Some started heading for their cars, eager to escape the spectacular implosion. Others lingered, phone still held high, not wanting to miss a single second of the drama. Preston's gaze, filled with a venomous rage, finally landed on me. "Are you happy now?" he seethed, his voice trembling. "You've ruined everything." "No, Preston," I replied, my voice calm and steady as I gathered my sons close. "You did. You ruined things yourself, with your lies." I took my boys' hands. "Come on, sweethearts. We should go." "But Mommy," Cameron said, his little brow furrowed. "You said we were going to a party." "The party is cancelled, my love," I explained gently. As my family and I turned to leave, Preston was left standing in the center of his half-empty wedding venue. He was an island of despair, surrounded by a sea of extravagance. $20,000 worth of white roses wilted in the Georgia heat. A $5,000 cake waited, untouched, in the kitchen. And all around him, the carefully constructed image of Preston Wallace, the powerful millionaire, crumbled into dust as his guests whispered and pointed, their phones capturing the very public humiliation he had so meticulously planned for me. Just as we reached the Bentley, a voice called out. "Wait. Dr. Harrison?" I turned. It was James Rivera, Brielle's father. He strode towards us, his expression a mixture of anger and respect. He glanced at Preston with undisguised contempt before addressing me. "I think my daughter would like to speak with you," he said. "Before you leave." I hesitated, looking at my parents and my boys. My mother gave me a slight nod. "Go," she whispered. "We'll watch the boys." I followed Vanessa, the shell-shocked wedding planner, back through the now empty ceremony space and into the main building. The silence was deafening. In the bridal suite, I found Brielle. She had changed out of her silk robe and was now wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She was sitting on a plush sofa, her elaborate makeup streaked with tears, looking younger and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "I'm so sorry," I began, not knowing what else to say. "I truly never intended for any of this to happen." She looked up, and I was surprised to see no anger in her eyes, only a profound sadness. "You didn't cause this," she said, her voice raspy. "I should be thanking you. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." "That wasn't my goal," I said softly, sitting down in a chair across from her. I needed to close that chapter of my life. On my terms, not his. "How long were you married?" she asked. 5 years, I replied. By the end, I barely recognized myself. He has a way of twisting things, of making you doubt your own reality, your own perceptions. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. I felt that, too. Little things that didn't add up. Questions he wouldn't answer clearly. I ignored so many red flags because I wanted to believe in the perfect picture. "We all do, when we want to believe in someone," I said gently. She looked at me for a long moment. "Your boys are beautiful," she said finally. "You did all of that on your own?" A genuine smile touched my lips. "With a lot of help from my parents and my friends. It wasn't the family I had originally imagined for myself, but it's become everything I ever needed." "I should have asked more questions," Brielle admitted, looking down at her hands. "About his past. About you. Maybe then I wouldn't be sitting here in a cancelled wedding venue with 300 people gossiping about me online." "Social media will find something new to talk about tomorrow," I assured her. "Trust me. I survived much worse rumors than this in Atlanta." Her father knocked gently on the door before entering. "I've arranged for us to stay at a different hotel tonight," he told her softly. "Away from all this." Brielle stood up and turned to me. "Strange as it sounds," she said, "I'm glad you came today." "So am I," I replied honestly. As I left the bridal suite, Leland was waiting in the hallway. "I've arranged a private dining room for your family at the Vineyard restaurant," he said with a kind smile. "Away from any prying eyes." Mr. Rivera and his daughter will be joining you, if that's all right. And so, in one of the strangest twists of my life, my family and I ended up having a quiet, peaceful dinner with the woman who was supposed to have married my ex-husband and her father. My boys, oblivious to the adult drama, happily colored on their menus while the adults spoke in low, thoughtful tones. Through the restaurant window, we could see Preston, a lonely figure trying to enter the main building, only to be turned away by his own security. He walked to his car alone, photographers capturing his solitary, dejected exit. Later that evening, back at our hotel, I tucked my sleepy sons into bed. The weight of the last 3 years, the weight of Preston's lies, finally felt like it had been lifted from my shoulders. As I was getting ready for bed myself, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It was Brielle. Thank you for the painful truth I needed to see. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. You're stronger than you think. You'll be okay. She replied almost instantly. Can we talk tomorrow? Before you leave Atlanta? Of course, I wrote back. Name the time and place. The next morning, Brielle and I met for breakfast. We sat in a quiet corner of her hotel's restaurant, two women whose lives had been irrevocably tangled by one man's deceit. She looked tired but resolute. We talked for over an hour, not as rivals, but as survivors. We shared stories, we found common ground in the subtle patterns of Preston's manipulation, and we found an unexpected sense of camaraderie. When we said goodbye, we hugged, two strangers brought together by a shared, painful experience, now bound by a mutual respect. My family and I flew back to Boston that afternoon. As the plane took off, I looked down at the glittering lights of Atlanta, a city that had once held so much pain for me. Now, it just looked like a place I used to know. I was finally free. The 6 months that followed were a study in contrasts. My life, which had already been good, blossomed. I poured my energy into my work, developing a new community outreach program for underserved pediatric patients. My efforts didn't go unnoticed. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was called into the hospital administrator's office and offered a promotion to head of pediatrics. That evening, I came home to a living room decorated with handmade signs that read, "Congratulations, Mommy," and celebrated with my 3 favorite little people by eating cookies for dinner. Brielle, too, found a new path. She left Atlanta and moved to New York. She abandoned her influencer career of posting perfect pictures and started her own social media consulting firm. Her new brand was built on a single, powerful idea: authenticity. She used her experience to help companies build real, honest connections with their customers, and she became more successful than ever. We kept in touch through occasional texts, cheering each other on from afar. Preston's life, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction. His downfall was as swift as it was brutal. The wedding disaster, which the media gleefully dubbed #weddingfail and #DerekExposed, was just the beginning. The accusations of financial irregularities, brought to light by the investor panic that day, triggered a full-scale investigation. It turned out Preston had been playing fast and loose with his company's finances for years, reallocating funds from one project to cover losses on another. His business partners turned on him, his company filed for bankruptcy, and his name became toxic in the Atlanta real estate world. The last I heard, he'd been forced to sell the penthouse in a short sale to stop the foreclosure. His parents, deeply ashamed by his public deception, had distanced themselves. He had lost everything: his wealth, his reputation, his fiancée, and the respect of everyone who had ever mattered to him. One weekend, I was in Chicago for a medical conference, where I'd been invited to speak on a panel about work-life balance. After my presentation, as I was chatting with a few colleagues, I saw a familiar face at the edge of the room. It was Garrett Cooper. He looked different. Calmer. He told me he'd left Atlanta right after the wedding, cutting all ties with Preston. He'd moved to Chicago and was now working for a healthcare investment firm. He apologized, again, for his years of silence. "I should have spoken up sooner, Audra," he said, his regret genuine. "I was a coward. It took me 3 years to find my own courage, I reminded him gently. Sometimes, the truth just takes a while to find its way into the light. We had coffee, and it was nice. Easy. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about the future. The following month, my family gathered in Philadelphia to celebrate my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. It was a warm summer evening, the backyard filled with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter. My sons played with their cousins, their happy shouts filling the air. As I was helping my mother with dessert, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brielle with a link to a news article. The headline read, Mitchell Development files for bankruptcy after failed restructuring attempts. My mother saw my expression. Bad news? She asked. I put my phone away and smiled, looking over at my boys as they tumbled in the grass. No, I said. Just an update on something from the past. Nothing that matters anymore. And it was true. I was at peace. The best revenge, I had come to realize, wasn't seeing Preston fall. It was building a life so full of my own joy, my own success, and my own purpose that his actions, his lies, and his entire existence had become completely and utterly irrelevant. Later that night, after I'd tucked my sleepy sons into bed, Caleb asked a question that caught me by surprise. Mommy, he whispered in the dark. Are you happy, even though we don't have a daddy like other kids? I sat on the edge of his bed, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. I looked at my 3 beautiful, perfect boys. I am happier than I ever thought was possible, I said truthfully. Our family might look a little different from some others, but it is perfect, exactly as it is. I think so too, he mumbled, already drifting off to sleep. As I stood in the quiet darkness, I thought about how different my life was from the one I had once planned. The pain of Preston's betrayal had, in the end, led me to a happiness far greater than I could have ever imagined. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Garrett. Thinking about our coffee in Chicago. Would love to catch up again next time you're here, or I'm in Boston. I smiled as I typed my reply. I'd like that very much. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. And the future, with all its bright, wonderful possibilities, was stretched out, open and waiting, right in front of me. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but your being here makes it feel worthwhile. If any part of this resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video or share it with someone who might need to hear it. And please, feel free to share your own thoughts and stories in the comments below. This is a community, and your voices matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember how strong you truly are.